Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Mud Pies and Family Ties by Dylann Crush. Narrated by Aiden Snow and Carly Robbins. 1. Dustin. Whoever said there's no such thing as bad publicity must have been misfiring without all his spark plugs. I sat across the desk from my high-paid Hollywood agent, waiting for him to take a break from the long-winded verbal ass-whooping he'd been delivering for the past 10 minutes. I'd never seen him so riled. Spittle flew from his lips. The more worked up he got, the more his cheeks began to match the color of the Bloody Mary sitting on the edge of his desk. Finally, the onslaught stopped. This was my chance. "Hey, Mav, I get that you're a little upset." "Upset? I was upset when you drove off the set of that television pilot last year, and I was upset when you didn't walk the red carpet at your last premiere." Okay, I shrugged, wincing as my injured shoulder rose and fell. "What do you want me to do? Call and apologize, send a bottle of bourbon?" Mav looked at me, his mouth hanging open like a slack-jawed baboon. "What? You think I need to send a single malt instead?" His jaw snapped shut and he waved his hands in front of his face like he couldn't bear the sight of me. "You need to get out of town for a while." "Don't you think you're overreacting a little?" "Dustin, you sent America's favorite late-night talk show host to the ER." Mav pounded a fist on the edge of his desk, making his drink clatter. "During his broadcast!" "It was an accident." I clenched my teeth. "I've done that stunt 1,000 times, 10,000 times. There must have been water on the stage or something." Mav ran a hand through his stylishly cropped and colored hair as he began to pace. "Where can you go? There's got to be a benefit or fundraiser somewhere I can send you." Seemed like a good time to mention the email I got yesterday from my high school back home. "I got an invite to a baseball field dedication." "Where?" Mav stopped in front of me. "Please tell me it's far away." "Missouri." Even saying it out loud made my heart jackknife in my chest. He steepled his fingers under his chin, his thinking pose. "Yes, Missouri, that should work. When can you leave?" "Wait a sec. You really think I need to get out of LA for a while? I could understand laying low, but leaving town? I've got projects in the works. I can't just walk away." "Yes, you can." Mav nodded, that familiar glint in his eye. The one that meant I was going to do whatever the hell he told me to. "In addition to garnering some good publicity, you need a break." "My shoulder's fine. I saw the doc this morning and he said 2 to 3 weeks max." Mav shook his head. "You fucked up so bad last night, I haven't even had a chance to tell you. The executive producer for that movie we've been talking about made time for drinks with me yesterday." "And?" He'd better have good news. We'd been working together for the past 10 years and he knew better than to jerk me around. "And they want you. Bad." I knew it. My chest expanded as I took in a satisfying breath. "I told you I had a good feeling about that job." "You did, and you were right." "But..." "Come on." No buts. Buts were bad. Buts could make or break a deal in a flash. "What's the holdup?" "You're your own worst enemy, my friend. They won't sign on the dotted line until the heat from the late-night show incident blows over and you're cleared by their doctor. Their doctor doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. I need a few weeks to heal. You know that's how I work, how I've always worked." "Ass from a hole in the ground? That's clever. Are you finished?" Most of the suits I worked with would have thrown me out already. That's what I liked about Mav. We got each other. He could listen to me rant and rave for 20 minutes, then yank me back into reality. Granted, I paid him well to do that, but still. He was Team Dustin all the way. He'd proven that time and again. "Yeah, I'm done." "Good. Then shut the hell up and listen. You're going to take that little trip to the baseball field dedication in Arkansas, Missouri. Whatever. Fish in a river, feed a goat, get great huge gulps of that fresh country air. Their doc said he won't even take a look at you for 12 weeks. "That's bullshit." I slapped my palm on the desk. My guy said my shoulder would be better in 2 weeks, 3 max. Yeah, and their doc says 12. Mav sighed, his telltale sign of being about to enter the part of the conversation where he'd pretend to take my side and then bust my balls in the end. I know you've got your heart set. Leave my heart out of it, okay? I'm one of the only guys who can do the kind of stunts they're asking for. You're right. That's why they're willing to wait until you're good to go. What am I going to do for 3 months? Like I said, breathe in smogless air, get out on the water, catch up with your high school sweetheart. I don't give a flying fuck what you do, Dustin. Just don't show your face around here until the media's found someone else to crucify and your shoulder's at 100%. My breath left my lungs in a huff. It's not fair. 2 weeks is all I need, of all the people I work with. You know the last thing this business would ever be considered is fair. He paused for effect, letting that obvious fact simmer between us. I might be able to convince him to take a look at you in 8. But you've got to work on that shoulder. Find a PT or someone who can help you get loose. Kiss your mama, eat some grits, hell, maybe even get yourself laid. I wanted to argue, to push back and tell him I'd be back on the lot after Memorial Day, just like we talked about. But it was no use. My future, my fortune, and my career were at the mercy of public opinion and some fresh-out-of-med school doctor who had no idea he'd just sealed my fate. Fine. Mom had been begging me to come home for a visit, but I never seemed to have the time. At least that's what I told her, and what I tried to tell myself. Maybe a quick trip home would make up for the fact I'd stayed away for so long. Mav grunted, picked up his drink, and pointed toward the door. He wasn't much for small talk, but I couldn't complain about his management skills. He was the only reason I hadn't had to tuck tail and crawl back to Swallow Springs, Missouri, when I'd made the initial trip out to L.A. I'd had stars in my eyes and a chip on my shoulder the size of the rusted-out Bronco I'd borrowed from my uncle to make the 1,600-plus mile drive. The Bronco didn't make it, but I did. Once I caught Mav's attention, he'd ensured I'd have my pick of motorcycle stunt jobs. I'd learned early on to shut up and let him take care of the details. That's what I paid him for, and that's what he did best. So as much as it irked me to think about sitting around twiddling my thumbs for the next 2 to 3 months, I knew he'd make sure it was worth my while in the end. And maybe, just maybe, this was a sign that the time had come to face my past. Less than 48 hours later, I'd almost completed my 1,600-mile road trip, and my ass hadn't ached this bad in years. Not since I'd committed to making a living by straddling the seat of anything with 2 wheels and an engine. At least I had been making a career on the seat of my motorcycle, until I'd botched that too. I shifted in the bucket seat behind the wheel of my truck and flipped through the satellite radio stations trying to find something to take my mind off the sorry situation I'd crashed into. And when I said crashed, I meant literally crashed. The mention of my name made my finger pause on the button. The internet is exploding with images of last year's Extreme Games winner, Dustin Jarrett's now immortalized wipeout on the set of Bobby Bordel's late-night talk show earlier this week. Rumor has it Bobby's still being treated at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, but should make a full recovery. Bordel was injured when a motorcycle stunt by Jarrett didn't go as planned. If you missed it, we've got the replay on our website at... I pushed the button off, silencing the radio. Thank God Bordel would be okay. The fallout from my TV appearance had been bad enough that Mav had me slinking halfway across the country to hide out at my mom's place. But at least now I knew I hadn't permanently injured America's favorite late-night talk show host. I'd been on the road for close to 28 hours. Would have been less, but I had to pull over for a couple of quick catnaps. I'd forgotten how long of a drive it was from Los Angeles to the tiny part of western Missouri where I'd grown up. Apart from having to change a flat outside of Albuquerque, it had been a relatively uneventful trip. Finally, the eyesore of a water tower that sat on the outskirts of town appeared in the distance. I'd never been so happy to see the ugly pea-green monstrosity as I was right now. It towered over the town of Swallow Springs, Missouri. Sat 227 feet off the ground. I knew that for a fact since I'd spent many late summer nights attempting to scale it and leave my temporary mark with a can of spray paint. Once I reached the center of downtown, the house I grew up in would be another 25-minute drive. I'd drained my coffee over an hour ago and hadn't eaten since I'd run through a drive-thru last night. Might be better to fuel up on caffeine and fill my stomach before seeing my mom. As I drove down Main Street, the bright neon sign of the Lovebird Cafe caught my eye. My stomach growled. I could almost smell the fresh fried chicken and homemade biscuits I'd enjoyed so many times in the past. Bright hanging baskets filled with pink and white flowers hung from the awning in front, begging me to stop in. Another half hour wouldn't make much of a difference in my long overdue return home. My mouth watered in anticipation, just imagining a platter of blueberry pancakes or one of their famous cinnamon rolls had me pressing on the brake. By the time I managed to park my truck in the trailer I'd hauled behind it, my belly groaned and griped like I hadn't eaten in ages. I glanced up, running my gaze over the loopy letters advertising the weekly special at the Lovebird Cafe. Mav was right. Maybe I was due for a little R&R. And I'd start with a giant platter of steak and eggs. Might even add on a Danish or two. If I had to be back in Swallow Springs, the cafe was as good a place as any to make my first appearance. Odds were no one would even recognize me, and hopefully none of them watched late-night TV. I'd been gone 15 years. Things around here had to have changed in that amount of time. I was counting on it.
2. Harmony. Mom, come quick! It's an emergency! If I had $1, or even a quarter, for every time my son Liam summoned me for an emergency that turned out to be nothing but an attempt to snag my attention, I wouldn't be waiting tables at the Lovebird Cafe. I took my time responding. First, I topped off the coffee mugs of the 2 regulars sitting at the counter, then turned to slide the carafe onto the hot plate. "What do you think it is this time?" Mr. Blevins, a widowed retired math teacher from the high school, leaned his elbows onto the counter. "Who knows?" I shrugged, rounding the counter before heading toward the front door. My 13-year-old son stood on the sidewalk in front of the cafe, with his fists on his hips. He appeared to be yelling at someone or something across the street. Since we'd moved to Swallow Springs a few weeks ago, he'd done nothing but cause trouble. The move was supposed to provide a safe place for him, far away from the rough crowd he'd gotten involved with out in L.A. "What's going on?" I pushed through the door, causing the overhead bell to jingle. "You'd better not be picking a fight. Come quick!" Liam grabbed my hand, dragging me around the corner to the back of the parking lot where I'd left the old pickup truck my cousin Robbie had loaned me. "I'm in the middle of a shift. You'd better stop right now and tell me what's going on." I planted my feet, not willing to budge until Liam filled me in. "That douche Rodney!" "Liam, I won't have you talking like that." Based on everything else that had been going on, his language ought to be the least of my concerns, but I couldn't help but go into autocorrect mom mode. "He's a dick, Mom." "Liam?" Teeth clenched together. I crossed my arms over my chest. "Language." "Fine." D-bag Rodney and his friends were chasing something down the sidewalk. Whatever it was ran back here and under the hood. I think they were trying to hurt it. Liam set his palm on the hood of the truck. My heart warmed. Liam might cause trouble from time to time, but he had a tendency to stand up for anyone and anything weaker than him if he sensed an injustice. "Looks like you scared the boys away. I'm sure whatever it is will crawl down and run back into the woods. You'd better get going or you're going to be late for school." I pulled him into my side. He gave me a half-hearted hug in return. I counted my blessings every day that he was still willing to hug me, even if it was half-assed. But what if it's stuck? It got in there, it can get out, okay? Are you sure? Technically, I had no idea. Before a few weeks ago, my only regular interaction with wildlife was limited to shooing away the nagging seagulls at Ventura Beach. But in the time we'd been in Swallow Springs, we'd already had run-ins with a scraggly rooster and a persistent albino squirrel that regularly raided the bird feeder I'd managed to hang in the front yard of our temporary living quarters. By the time I'm done with my shift, I'm sure it will be long gone. I put an arm over Liam's shoulders. If he got any taller, it would be impossible to continue to do that without rising onto my tiptoes. My heart twinged. If his father could see him now, would he be amazed at what a little man our son had turned into? I shook the thought away. Liam's dad had no right to know anything about his son. He'd made a different choice years ago. You promise to look before you leave, just in case? Liam spun to face me. The look of concern on his face begged for reassurance. Yep, pinky swear. I held out my pinky and he wrapped his little finger around mine, sealing my promise with the gesture we'd used since he was just a kid. All right. See you at 3, okay? During his limited time at the Swallow Springs Middle School, he'd already been banned from the bus, which meant he had to ride into work with me in the mornings, then walk the few blocks to school. It also meant I had to stick around to pick him up after, unless I wanted to make another hour-long trip back and forth into town. See ya! Liam skulked down the sidewalk, leaving me to wonder if I'd made the right decision by pulling him away from the only place he'd ever known. Everything okay? My boss, Cassie, joined me. Yeah, he was defending some sort of animal that might have crawled under the hood of the truck. Did he say what it was? No, he didn't get a good look at it. He said those kids were chasing it. Rodney's somebody. Yeah, he's a troublemaker. Cassie shook her head. Do you think I was wrong to bring Liam here? What if he never fits in? Cassie put an arm around my shoulder and gave me a squeeze. He's a good kid. He'll figure it out. I hope so. You sure you can handle things here for a bit? I've got to go drop off that box lunch delivery. Cassie held the door open as we re-entered the cafe. Yeah, I'll be fine. I'd been at this job for a few weeks, but this was the first time I'd been left alone to wait on customers. We didn't get a huge weekday morning rush, and it was too early for the lunch crowd yet. With only a couple of regulars manning stools at the counter, I'd be fine until Cassie returned. All right, then. I'll see you later. Cassie grabbed a huge bag off the counter. I held the door for her as she passed through. With any luck, I wouldn't even see another customer until lunchtime. I poured myself a mug of coffee from the carafe sitting under the massive commercial machine, wishing for an almond milk chai latte instead. The bell over the door jangled, pulling my attention from the steaming source of caffeine. A guy paused in the entryway of the small diner. Couldn't he tell we had a seat-yourself policy? I grabbed the carafe and a clean mug before pushing through the swinging half-door into the main room. You can sit anywhere. His gaze met mine. Green eyes, somewhere between the bright shade of my malachite crystals and the dusky green of moldavite, seemed to evaluate me.
Is this okay back here?
He pointed to a booth in the corner, the same booth I usually hid in when it was time for my break. Yeah, that's fine. I followed him, taking in the breadth of his shoulders and the twisted black ink covering his forearms. Want coffee? Please. I set the cup on the table and poured. If I'd learned nothing else during my brief time waiting tables at the Lovebird, it was that everyone wanted coffee and they wanted it as soon as possible. The first time I'd offered a customer a choice of coffee or tea, they'd stared at me like I'd grown another head and asked the question in ancient Greek. Thanks. He picked up the mug and lifted it toward his mouth. My gaze followed. As he swallowed, I gulped in a breath. A chunk of his shoulder-length hair fell toward his face. He reached up to tuck it behind his ear. Something about him looked familiar, but I struggled to figure out why. I definitely remember seeing someone like him if he'd come into the diner before. Do you need a menu? I asked.
They still make that steak and eggs platter?
He rested a muscled arm along the back of the booth. The twisty ink followed a path from his wrist past his elbow, disappearing into the sleeve of his t-shirt. What?
Steak and eggs? A T-bone as big as your face with fried eggs on top and a huge side of buttered grits? They still have that on the menu?
More like a heart attack on a plate. I couldn't get past the way the folks in Swallow Springs loved their country cooking. Cassie made it as fresh and healthy as she could, but still, it was a miracle some of the regulars hadn't collapsed of heart failure decades ago. How about a side of fresh fruit, or some wilted spinach to go along with it? If anyone were grading my efforts, I'd get an A+ for trying to introduce some healthier options to the diner crowd.
No thanks. Just the grease today.
He took another sip of coffee while I stood there, totally mesmerized by the way he managed to make taking a sip of coffee look super sexy.
Harmony?
Mr. Blevins called me from across the room, snapping me out of my trance. Be right there. I whipped the pencil out from behind my ear to jot the order down on my notepad. Anything else?
Just keep the coffee coming.
He slid his mug toward me, already ready for a refill. I topped it off before retreating toward the safety of the kitchen, stopping to check on my 2 favorite customers on the way. What can I do for you, Mr. Blevins?
I told you, hun. Just call me Frank. Lou and I wouldn't mind splitting a piece of that coffee cake you've got in the front case over there.
I bit back a grin. They played this game at least twice a week, at least since I'd been in town. You sure one piece will be big enough to share?
Oh, I don't know. What do you think, Lou?
Frank nudged his friend with his elbow.
Maybe we ought to get our own.
I set the coffee down on the counter. 2 pieces coming right up.
If you insist.
Lou leaned across the counter.
Who was that you were talking to over there?
I looked up, seeking out the stranger in the back booth. I don't know. You think he's from around here? Lou and Frank tilted their heads together, whispering back and forth. Well, I slid a plate in front of each of them, a generous slice of coffee cake on each.
Looks to me like the Jarrett boy,
Frank said, picking up his fork. Who? I refilled their mugs while sneaking another glance at the man who'd taken over my booth.
Dustin Jarrett. Used to live outside of town,
Lou mumbled.
Left to go make movies in Hollywood.
Hollywood? I rose to my tiptoes to get a better look. The guy definitely had the looks for the big screen. Really? Would I have seen him in anything? Frank snickered.
You might have seen him on Bobby Bordel's show earlier this week. He was supposed to do a burnout on his bike but lost control and took out the house band and Bobby.
On a bike? I asked.
He does stunts, Lou said. Motorcycles and such. Haven't seen him around here in years, though.
I shot one more glance at the back corner before heading into the kitchen to drop off the order ticket. That's probably why he looked familiar. Liam had posters of motorcycles hanging on his walls and was always watching stunt videos. I'd have to ask him if he knew of someone with the last name Jarrett. While I waited for Cassie's new hire, Ryder, to fry the steak and eggs, I sized up the giant commercial coffee machine. Cassie had shown me a half-dozen times how to brew a fresh pot, but it still hadn't clicked. I took a new filter out of the cabinet and reached for the handle of the basket. As I pulled it toward me, brown liquid flowed out of the machine, leaking onto the counter and dripping onto the floor. Oh, no. I tried to shove the basket into the slot, but it wouldn't go back.
What are you doing over there? Ryder asked.
Nothing. Everything's fine. I tried to fill my voice with confidence, a difficult task as steaming hot coffee raced toward my hand. With a final push, the basket clicked into place. I'd forgotten to check which side was still brewing. Now I had coffee on the floor, the counter, and down the front of my apron.
Order up!
Ryder tapped on the bell. I dabbed at the coffee trailing down my front with a paper towel. Got it! I nabbed the plate from under the warming station and snagged the half-full pot of coffee off the burner. As I approached the table, the man unrolled his silverware and slid the paper napkin onto his lap. Somehow that tiny gesture instilled a new measure of confidence in my serving ability. Here you go. Steak and eggs, and I brought you more coffee, too. I set the plate on the table in front of him before leaning over to fill his mug.
Did you have an accident in the kitchen?
What? I stood abruptly, causing the stream of coffee to flow away from the cup, slosh onto the table, and dribble into his lap.
Sweet mother of...
His knees bucked up. The platter of steak and eggs flew into the air before it clattered back onto the table.
Ah, shit.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. As I slammed the pot down on the table, the carafe cracked. Coffee went everywhere. I grabbed a stack of napkins and swabbed at the spill, wiping up the traces of coffee from the edge of the table, then dabbing at the growing wet spot on his thigh.
I've got it.
His hand closed around mine, making me realize I'd just been rubbing my hand over a stranger's groin. Heat flooded my system. Flames of embarrassment scorched my cheeks as I wrenched my hand away from his. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened.
How about some more napkins?
He asked. Absolutely. Right away. I fled to the kitchen where I pulled an entire sleeve of paper towels from the storage cabinet. By the time I returned to his table, he'd sopped up as much of the coffee mess as he could. I handed him a stack of paper towels and gathered the dripping mess in my hands. His pulse ticked along a vein on his neck. Based on the way his jaw set, clenched and tensed, I figured it would be best to leave the man to eat in peace. He held his hand out, flexing his fingers. A patch of angry red skin covered the area between his thumb and pointer finger. You've got a burn. I held the soggy towels against my apron. Let me grab something. I'll be right back.
It's fine,
he called after me, but I'd already raced across the room and pushed through the doors into the kitchen. I tossed the towels in the trash. My purse was in the office. I always carried a small kit of my oils with me, just in case something like this happened. Armed with my makeshift homeopathic medical kit, I hustled back to the table. Here, let me put a little lavender oil on it. Before he could argue with me, I'd uncapped the small bottle and cradled his hand in mine, letting a few precious drops drip onto his hand.
What the hell is that for?
His brows knit together, drawing my attention to the furrow creasing his forehead. Once upon a time, I might have smoothed the lines away. I couldn't stand to see anyone suffer, no matter how small and insignificant their pain might be. But time and life experience had taught me that not everyone was a willing recipient of my concern. This man looked like he'd experienced his own lessons in the school of hard knocks, and wouldn't be so open to my healing touch. Lavender oil should help it heal faster. He gently pulled his hand away.
It's just a little burn.
Let me know if I can get you anything else. Poised to retreat, I snagged the broken carafe of coffee.
I think you've done enough.
He nodded toward his mug.
Although, if you manage to figure out how to work that machine, maybe you could bring me a refill without a bunch of grounds in it.
A wave of panic rolled up from my gut, through my chest, as I noticed the clumps of dark coffee grounds amid the mess of broken glass and towels. I'm sorry. I'll bring a fresh pot right away.
That would be great.
Thanks. I waited, not sure if he'd say anything else. When he picked up his knife and fork, I considered it a dismissal and retreated to the safety of the kitchen. Why had I thought this would be a good idea? I'd never waited tables in my life, but things had changed. The life I'd known before had taken a turn, and if I needed to learn how to be the best damn waitress in the world in order to create a safe place for me and my son, I'd figure out a way to do it. As I dumped the goopy mix of towels, glass, and grounds into the trash, I reconsidered my goals. Maybe becoming the best waitress in the world was too lofty of an aspiration. At the moment, I'd settle for becoming the best waitress in the tiny town of Swallow Springs, Missouri. Competition was next to none. I should be able to at least handle that. Or die of embarrassment trying. Fortified with resolve, I turned my attention to the huge coffee maker. Let's do this, you shrew.
3. Dustin. I slid my wallet out of my back pocket and set it on the table, ready for the check. I knew things would have changed since the last time I'd set foot in Swallow Springs, but at least the steak and eggs at the cafe had remained the same. We used to come here at least a couple times a week. Mom made such a big deal out of dragging us to town on Sundays. If my sister Scarlett and I made it through church without complaining, then Dad would treat us to breakfast at the diner. Those were the good old days.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?